The official title of this class is what will the new normal look like? Is that right? Anyone has the program here? There's a subtitle as well. I forgot what it is. Okay. But since, as we've spoken, it's an intimate little group here. I'm happy to speak about anything that's on your minds. So if you have something specific, questions, we can go with that. Or I can share some words, hopefully of wisdom. You see the program?
I'm getting it.
Would you say that there's any chance of it going back to of the new normal somewhat?
Did you get the WhatsApp?
Yeah, my son got it. He just told us that it's...
Ah, good. I just wanted to make sure.
Would you say that there's any way?
Please make yourself comfortable. We just began. I opened the floor for questions.
Would you say that the new normal will ever resemble the old normal? And if so, how long will it take?
Okay, so this is, let's see. What does it say? Okay, what will the new normal look like? Reclaiming yourself. Good. Just want to make sure of the title. Good. So then we're talking on this topic. Let me just say a few words about this. First of all, I want to make it clear here. There's a difference between a prophet and let's say a visionary. In other words, I'm not going to share here any crystal ball. Yeah, we can close the door now. That's fine. There's magic. Mentalist.
I'm a prophet.
You couldn't do that from a distance?
I'm not tugging it.
Yeah. Anything behind that telekinetic stuff? Or is it just a trick?
I think it's a trick. It's a good one. Like the whole
Yeah, but it's been going on for years.
Take one spoon. Like, to show one spoon is bad or one is good.
It's when he's shaking her hand and he feels it.
There's all kinds of explanations for that one.
That's a tough one.
But laser beams, they got all kinds of stuff.
I don't know. And then when he's touching the screen and the kid feels it.
That was my grandson.
That was so good.
Yeah.
I don't know it, but there's definitely, I don't think it's like, there's definitely some sort of like trick to it.
It's a good one. Good trick.
It's true. Like, for example, I know a kid, he was saying his father knew a bunch of the tricks.
Mm-hmm.
And like how there are certain cameras and certain things in a certain way.
Yeah.
And he was saying it, and the guy was like, yeah. The guy was like, yeah. Like, that's it. Because they were in the front, and they were saying,
I mean,
he did this and this.
It's weird. I don't know. He did a nice job.
Yeah, he did a great job. But just by the way, if you were here like 5 years ago, he did the same exact act.
That was the same act.
I was here 5 years ago.
Hey, whatever.
Okay, my friends, let's get to the topic here. So there's no crystal ball prophecies that I can really share, even though I will share some ideas that are stated in the ancient texts, either in the Torah or in the Medrash or other places that do talk about disruptions and upheavals and what they lead to. But I just I like to avoid sensationalism where, an actual, this leads to that type of thing. What I will say is from a scientific point of view, one of the things that scientists always look for, and I'm talking about real science, is when you want to study any phenomenon, or any individual for that matter, you want to see it not in one circumstance. You want to see it in different circumstances. Like if you say, okay, you came to certain conclusions, but then you say, what happens if it was exposed to extreme heat? Would the same effects take place, or extreme cold, or higher speeds? I mean, even like a vaccination, officially, they're testing it in every possible environment because it can work on one person and then not for others. So the same is true psychologically and emotionally and spiritually. That when things are going, we'll call it quote unquote normal. Say new normal. The question is what normal means in the first place, which I'll talk about in a moment. So as soon as you say something is everything was going, let's call January 2020. We call it BC, before Corona. So in January 2020, things were pretty much rolling along, predictable. We actually had Pesach plans last year, right? And summer plans, and school, and camp, and people had their season tickets or whatever, baseball or the other sports, and theater, the works. Everybody had their schedules. So you don't really know what people are made of until you put them in unnatural circumstances. And so the first thing that I think is critical is to look at it from that perspective. Because suddenly everything was disrupted. You couldn't do almost anything the way you would have usually done. And what happened, the results, and I'm not talking about the tragic results of deaths and illness, that's obvious. And I'm also not discussing all the different, the politicization of it all and the polarization and everyone using it for their own agenda. And if you're the skeptic that says pharmaceuticals are always trying to cash in, there's a lot to talk about all that. But I'm not going to go there. That's not really the topic here. I'm talking more on a human interaction level, social. So to me, as someone who's always been involved with people, in many different circumstances, it was very, I don't want to use the word fascinating because it was painful, but it was very illuminating to see people not in the regular comfort zone. And it brought out the best in some and the worst in others. The relationships were affected. Very often relationships that weren't working well did not do better under these circumstances. And then, of course, the big question, as I just said earlier, what does normal mean? Just because you've been doing it for 20, 30 years doesn't mean it's normal. It just means that's what you're used to. That's your habit. That's your pattern. That's your routine. So coming from a Jewish or Torah perspective, we always knew throughout history that not only were we adaptable to changing circumstances, which we had to be, because we were never secure in any land or under any leader. So besides adaptability, there's something much deeper than that. I spoke about in the first days of the holiday, the idea of the verse in the book of Exodus, Shmois, that says, as they were oppressed, they thrived and they flourished. In other words, oppression brought out the deeper strengths, which we see today as well. People who suffer, whether it's in recovery or from an illness or from something psychological or emotional or a loss or a trauma, very often become far greater people. Not everybody. And everybody wants to know what the formula is. So that's what I want to address, these questions. What did it reveal about human nature? And what does normal mean? And the goal of all of this, what I'd like to leave with, the objective of this conversation here, is what have we learned, and how can we use it to create a better future, individually and collectively? Because to just behave like a ship lost at sea and let the waves carry you any which way, I think many people are going to do that because that's their lives. But I think we would like to take control somewhat. So as I've said a number of times, you can't control the storm, but you control how you navigate through it. The difference between a good swimmer and a bad swimmer is when the storm strikes. So a bad swimmer is going to fight the tide and become desperate and can even get exhausted and drained and unfortunately drown. A good swimmer, when they see a storm, they're not like better. They'll just know it's not a storm you should fight. And they'll let themselves just float and go with the tide. And now is not the time to exert all your energy. And when the storm abates, and then you go forward. That's simply a matter of navigation. It sounds simple, but we all know a drowning victim, look, it's even lifeguards, even very trained people, a drowning victim gets desperate and they start flailing. So I think psychologically is also the case. We don't realize how vulnerable we are until we suddenly get exposed to it. And that's where you see the difference between the boys and the men, or the girls and the women. I don't know if they put it that way. Like, think of it like being at war. People who are non-veterans, people who are novices, and they go to war, the first time there's a shot, or there's some retreat or some attack, many people will just panic and run. And the veterans are the ones that have been there. They have a certain composure and sense of presence that they don't get frazzled by even a crisis. So that's what I would like to address, and I think we will come away with ways of looking at the new normal. Because I don't think it's just going to be an objective new normal where, will there be, for example, ever again cruises? Or will there be sports as it was, 70,000 people in a stadium? I mean, predictions are being made and everybody has their ideas about it. And frankly, I think these are more circumstantial factors. I think it's going to take time. People who are familiar, and I'll start with this, with pandemics and upheavals, generally say it takes around 4 years for things to come back to a place as it was beforehand. Because remember, it's not just the actual, in this case, virus, even if it's even they reach herd immunity, and it's also psychological. Once you don't have to go to a restaurant every week, you start asking, do I have to go again? Now some people will, and that's another thing. It's very hard to predict because the population is different. I know people, as soon as the first hotel opened up in the country, they were there, even though they were full of plexiglass and you couldn't sit anywhere. But most people didn't, because why do I go to a hotel just to feel like you're in a prison? But I think there are diehards who will always immediately, as soon as possible, go back to what they consider normal. But the question is, what about the critical mass? How many of us? So I have no question in my mind. I'll go back to my questions in a moment. I was just starting from the very basic. That there will be changes. There's always changes after. If this was 1 month, remember everyone last year around March said, by June, July, we're back to normal. So that I could say, okay, fine, it was a few month thing. But once it started dragging on, and now it's a year, there has to be changes because you're dealing with too many people. You're dealing with an exponential element. Technology today makes everybody aware of everybody, which was not the case of the Spanish flu. I did my studies, my research during this last year, what happened after other pandemics. So we had the Spanish flu 100 years ago, 1918. But you have others, the bubonic plague, you have the black plague, the plagues throughout history. Generally speaking, plagues led to awakenings, interestingly, spiritual awakenings. There were spiritual movements that grew out of it, and spiritual awareness. That was one of the things that's pretty common. And it's obvious, because when people's lives are somewhat disrupted, they turn to more ethereal and spiritual resources, because it's the nature of the human being to look for hope. And I'm not being cynical about it. The cynics can say, okay, it's not real, it's just humans are desperate, so they turn to God, so to speak. But the fact is, many changes happened. I'll just share one that's very interesting. We all know about the black plague, they call it the black plague, which I think was the bubonic plague, I think so. And it killed a third of European population, I believe, right? A third? Something like that, huh?
Learned this in history last year.
third. A lot of people. It's a big, big number. Now, thank God we're not talking about numbers like that. But an interesting thing happened there. Many things happened as a result. One of the things I read about, which I was pretty intrigued, because so many people died, and it was proportionate across both the elite, the bourgeois, as they say, and the proletariat, and the workers. So, of course, the majority, the masses, who were the laborers, more of them died. So suddenly, labor became very valuable, because you couldn't just go, basically a third of the workforce died. So the so-called monarchs and the aristocrats and all the people, the ruling class, essentially, could not just, they had to find, so the workers suddenly got empowered as a result. And it was the beginning of the development of work unions and what we call today capitalism. And the other economic systems that started discussing, one second here, we're not just going to have the wealthy and the poor. It gave power to these workers. Now, that's unique because of the large amount of people that died. But there were a lot of other changes that happened because the whole society was disrupted. Many people argue that the Black Plague was the beginnings of the Renaissance, and then which would lead to the other developments that we are benefiting from today. Now, the Black Plague is long gone. We don't remember its pain. A lot of people died. Many Jews were even accused of poisoning the wells, etc., etc. Some said that very few Jews died. So they blamed the Jews. Now, the reason for that, some argue, there's a lot of talk about it, is because the Jews did not eat the same foods. And so they were, in a sense, like almost insulated from some of the trends that were going on then. Who knows?
My teacher told us last year, he told us the reason that the Jews, whenever they would eat, they would wash their hands first.
Right, correct. Washing the hands, and no one at that time knew necessarily the importance of washing hands. So washing hands, that was also done right in the beginning of our pandemic. They were to say wash your hands, sanitizing. But overall, what you could find in common is shifts that happen, because as soon as a large mass of the population's lives are disrupted, there have to be shifts. Now, a few other obvious things that I'll mention, then I'll go a little deeper into the topic, is the fact that technology, that is unprecedented. The move to Amazon and online shopping has been already progressing in the last 20 years, 15 years. Amazon has, even in New York, big New York, stores have been closing for the last 5-6 years, retail joints, besides services like let's say a hair salon or something, things like music stores, bookstores, any type of retail,
Blockbuster.
Yeah, any type of retail thing. Why would people... Now, with this has definitely accelerated the process. I would say probably 10 years, by 10 years even. That's just my rough estimate, because people are buying now cars online, furniture online, which was once not that, you wanted to see it, but because this forced people to purchase online, now they're comfortable with it. Now, will some go back to malls? And I'm sure they will. But I have no doubt Macy's and Saks and all these big ones are going to have to revisit their models. And they're going to have to move online for sure, even if they have a location or two. Just like Walmart realized that, and others. So that's a shift that I think is going to be forever. And maybe for the good, But again, you can't predict a whole population, because there are some people who would still use rotary phones if they were option, because they just don't change. In marketing, they always talk about the 5 different categories. What do you get to the tipping point? How do you create something that affects the critical mass? So they say it's like this. The first, there are the innovators, which is the smallest part of the population. There's early adopters, people who right away buy a new phone and new technology. There's the late adopters. Then there's the average. And then there's the laggards. Like I said, the laggards are the ones that won't change a rotary phone unless there's no rotary phone left. They say the tipping point happens when you reach something, I think 2/3 of the late adopters or something. That's when you're getting into territory that can create real change. If it's only innovators and early adopters, it's right. It remains a novelty. And
electric cars right now are in that early adapter period.
right.
But in 10, 15 years, you will not be able to buy a gas-powered car.
That's a perfect example. That's a perfect example. So that's one shift that is clear, the whole business and commerce and so on. The next thing, of course, we all know about online learning and online meetings, which is changing the job market dramatically. I mean, everybody has seen now that you could, I mean, we all know having a personal one-on-one contact like this is always preferable. But still, it's all, you weigh pros and cons. Situation is, if people feel, hey, you know what, I don't have to live, let's say, in metropolitan areas. I could live in a suburb, and we have great online technology, and I assure you that in the next year or two, there are going to be tremendous strides that compete with Zoom to make it really as virtual reality as possible. And that will change, first of all, how people work, commuting, and the main cities. Now, New York is not necessarily going to become, a small little town, but I live in New York, and it's gone through dramatic changes, especially psychological ones. If you see Madison Avenue, Fifth Avenue boarded up, which was a tremendous mistake because it's lowered the morale. It's a psychological thing. I'm not even getting into the looting and the lawlessness. It's just suddenly you feel that, the place you live in, everything's supposed to be so intact. Even 9/11, New York stood strong. It has to have impact. I know thousands of people who are second homes and they're moving and they're going to sell, and it's going to change rentals and leasing. Very hard to predict. Not even getting into the fact that once the courts open for foreclosures, what's going to happen then? I'm sure they're going to be very lenient and probably going to give some forgiveness because it's going to be impossible to, all those that defaulted on mortgages and stuff like that. So these are changes. I'm not saying anything here that maybe others could say as well, but I also say it from the context of looking at the bigger picture. Even though some people argue it's all going to go back exactly where it was, I do not think so. Because as soon as you have another option, options are very powerful. If you think you don't have an option, you got to go to work. I know from people I work with. They say, I don't need to go to the office. Let's meet online. Or, you know what, today I'm not feeling so well. Let's just do a Zoom. That was not existent a year ago. A year and a half ago. You didn't have that option.
It won't be any less nowadays.
Yeah. And now online learning. Now, remember, there's also implications that are not so positive. Because can children really learn remotely without a teacher, without human touch? Huh? No, I know that. So there's going to be these issues. I think for anyone who's a real business person, there's tremendous opportunities because there are going to be new industries for sure that are going to develop, and new industries are going to come to compensate for things that are lacking. So there's definitely a new norm developing. But the real focus I want to focus on is on the human, on us, on relationships, and even I'll even call it messianic view on life. What does all this mean from the point of view of spiritual awareness and so on? Now, this is an interesting one that I always struggle with. I meet many people, and I deal with many people. And there are people who are by nature spiritual people. You don't need to convince them. They're wired that way. They just think spiritually. They're open to it. Life is not just purely material success. There are people that are just wired that way. And sometimes it does come because of a loss and pain, but sometimes people are just that way. That's how it is. I don't think it's the majority of the population, but there are people that way. And I'm sure some of you may be that way, or you know others. They just think that way, and they're just open to that. That's one. But a large segment of the population is not that way. And though everybody has spiritual needs, and everybody has times of crisis where they need someone to talk to, and that's why people go to therapy, or they find other ways of relief. I would even argue that most addictions are a form of trying to find some relief, so they can't find it in healthy ways. Someone finds it in unhealthy ways. To me, spirituality is exactly that in a healthy way. What I mean by that is if someone had that, a deeper meaning to life and purpose, they would not need to escape to or rely on substances or behaviors that are not necessarily good for them. I've been watching this very closely because I'm seeing people I know who are very materialistic. And what I mean by materialistic, I'm not saying in a critical way. I'm saying they measure everything in terms of dollars and cents and so on, even if they're intelligent. And I see that some have become more vulnerable and more receptive to some deeper way of looking at life. Now, will that last? That's an interesting question. That goes back down. I'm just reminding myself of a guy I know many years. He's a musician. He is a spiritually wired type of guy, but then he had a real life-threatening situation a few years ago. He ended up in the hospital. The doctors, he was in his early 70s. The doctors had given up on him. And he remembered calling me, and he became very godly. Prayers and study, and he really wanted to. And it wasn't insincere, but it was due to his condition, for sure. And I remember I said to him, tell me, God will protect you and you come out of this place. He wasn't convinced he was coming out of here, but you think he'll maintain this level of deeper awareness and a spirit of generosity and so on. He says, for sure, this was, it's my life and death here. Well, you know what? God did help him, and he came out. And within a month or two, and I remember him telling me, I said, remember our conversation? And I wasn't saying it to try to prove anything. I wish it wasn't the way. He said, yeah, but you know what? Human nature is human nature. You go back and you take for granted your blessings. And even though you had a wake-up call and you could say God was good to you, gave you another chance, it's to me, it's always I don't know if I'm different in many ways because we are creatures of habit and we often gravitate back to our natural place. When I say natural, I mean, things we're comfortable with. And now he's a good guy, but I see he doesn't have that alacrity and so on. What do you think about that? And I always struggle with this because I say to myself, is it possible to bottle that inspiration that should be maintained, or is it going to dissipate? What do you think?
I have a good friend who had a life-threatening situation, had surgery, actually was almost dead 3 times in this 2-month period that he was in the hospital. If his daughter wasn't a doctor watching, she noticed something during surgery and contacted the doctor, and the tube wasn't going right in. So he was saved, demolished 3 times. And he's walking around, and now he's smoking cigarettes again. And of course, you shouldn't be smoking cigarettes, but you go back to things that you did before.
So the question is the $1 million question. Is there something that can be done? Because that, I think, is one of the big questions I have collectively regarding COVID. Because I have seen thousands. I can tell you from my work, the last year, we're April 2nd today? What is that, right? Yeah. We're in April. So let's say the last year, when it started. I remember Purim was a Thursday, I believe, or Wednesday? One of the two.
Wednesday or Thursday.
Yeah. I remember right away, I have in my house, I have like a built-in studio. So I went straight to the camera and I just recorded something, a 5-minute piece on COVID and Purim. And then I just didn't stop. I've been more busier in the last year than I've ever been. Probably quadruple amount. I literally do 14 programs every week. I'm not saying this as an advertisement. I'm just telling you. And I'm not, because I just have nothing to do with myself. And there's our following and subscribers have quadrupled, literally, organically. So it's not like in my mind. And I see it. I see how people respond. I see what the reaction. Even donations. Not that we're rolling the money or anything, but donations like randomly. Jews and non-Jews from Kentucky, from Ottawa. I mean, people we never heard of are just thankful, and I guess, and they're like appreciating it. I did a daily 3-minute, if you recall. I stopped it after Rosh Hashanah because we had a different program, but I did like over 130 daily 3-minute. We called it your spiritual antidote. It's like a daily inspirational thought. It's still there. People still watch it and listen to it and so on. And I know from our work, And this is just one guy and my team, and I see it. So I say to myself, and it's not, will this last? Because on one hand, we're not crisis management. It's not like we're the first responders, and that may stop once, let's say, the crisis is over. We're offering spiritual and meaningful emotional resources in challenging times. So it's hard for me to predict, but I will say the following. Based on my own experience, I think there will definitely be a percentage of people, I don't know how big, that will have tasted and experienced something deeper and will not let it go. Even if they go back to many of their habits and so on, I do think that. I mean, I just sense that, but knowing people and so on. Will there be people who just, once they get back, will just go back to their routines? I'm sure there will be. I don't think anybody can state for a fact that every 100% of the population is going right back to where it was, or 100% is not going back. So I really think when you ask this question, it has to be broken down into groups. As I said, I look at it sometimes, and it's not in any type of, it's not a judgmental way. There are people who, as I said, are more spiritual. More spiritual people in general, events like this ultimately make them even more spiritual. Because they just see it more, it's very much like with Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, that people who suffered and they had meaning in their lives, they don't lose that meaning once the suffering is over. That's their life. So that's what I wanted to say about it. But I want to go a little further. But do you want to say something?
I'm part of an organization. I just realized I'm wearing the hat from that organization, Enactus. That organization helps students on college campuses do things for other people. And by doing for others, they develop themselves and become...
Very nice.
And they had competitions. What did this school do? What did this school do? And they compare the colleges, and they have this national competition and then a worldwide competition in 35 countries. Because of COVID, it's not extinct, but it's really taken a toll because it was all about community. And now they hired specialists to come and redefine what this organization should be, starting from scratch. What should we do? How do we get involved with this? And that's, I think, what's going to be happening a lot. That's going to be the opportunity you're talking about for businessmen or for rabbis, recreating things. How do we create this new atmosphere?
I'm glad you brought it up because exactly what I was going to lead into now.
Okay, so that's the era of Moshiach. You're going to start speaking
Yeah.
about it and we'll realize...
I agree. In Kabbalah and a Hasidic thought, there's a concept called, I'll say it in Hebrew, Yesh, Ayin Yesh. It means, literally, Yesh means a paradigm, a state of being. Ayin is almost like a vacuum and a void. And that leads to a new paradigm. That whenever there's a paradigm shift from one state to another, a caterpillar has to go through the metamorphosis of the chrysalis, the cocoon, it becomes a butterfly. A mother goes through birth pains and pregnancy pains to give birth to a new child. You have the seed rots in the ground to give birth to a sapling. And even on a level of creativity is your child of frustration. If there's going to be creativity, you always are going to be preceded by frustration. I can't tell you, I'm sure any of you have ever written or delivered something. There's always that frustrating element where you get all confused until you finally get to some clarity. So comfort zones keep you in your paradigm. There's no way that there's growth. There's no area of growth that did not come with some form of disruption. It could be a disruption that's not that unpleasant, but it could be a terrible disruption. But that's how it is. It's the nature of life. Sometimes forest fires, which can be so devastating, actually help the forest regenerate and get rid of a lot of its toxins. So you have this everywhere. Hurricanes, we call them natural disasters, and earthquakes and volcanoes. But if you didn't have them, this earth could not last. It releases pressure, and so on. They become a disaster when human beings are on their path. But earthquakes that happen under the ocean almost all the time are necessary for the balance. And I remember I even wrote once an article, interview with Francis. It was the Hurricane Francis that, among other hurricanes. So I did like a interview with Francis. And why would you come and destroy so many lives and stuff? It was very interesting. Huh? Oh, that's a good one. Now this time was a hurricane. Next time I'll do the Pope. The point being is that and that's a critical thing to keep in mind. As a matter of fact, Mitzrayim, which means constraints, is considered to be one of the big ayins between the yesh of the Jewish people before they came to Egypt and when they left. And it was a birth. It's compared to a birth. And the Mitzrayim is considered like a cavity, the birth canal, that pressured the people and made them into a powerhouse. Now, obviously, the pain is the pain.
I want to jump on that because Mitzrayim is where we had this ship that blocked the canal these last few weeks.
Yeah, good point. Okay.
I'm in business, and we've had to take goods. We make some yarn in Egypt and Turkey, as well as China. And we've had to take shipments of yarn from Egypt to Israel to ship from Haifa to the United States.
Because of the Suez Canal.
Yes.
So talk about canals,
So
right?
And the canal, this Mitzrayim is Pesach, and this is the blockage now.
Okay, there you go. So the point is that I think Eleanor Roosevelt said that women are like tea bags. You don't know how strong they are until you put them into hot water. All creative people are that way. The Jewish people are that way. And we don't want the hot water, and no one likes pressure. I can tell you, without pressure, without deadlines, I wouldn't produce much. I'd be still sitting in my book 30 years ago, and just, okay, I can make it better. Into deadlines, which we hate, cause you to produce. So this is a key point. So I have no question in that context that this period of time, I think I spoke about it also in one of my previous talks, it's an age of disruption in every possible way. Yeah. Trump was a disruption. And I'm saying it in a positive way. It's not an anti-Trump, it's just internet's a disruption. And whenever you're in a situation where you're comfortable, nobody likes to be disrupted. You're sitting in your home, you're living retired, why do you want to, who wants to suddenly be displaced? But it turns, this is to me clear, especially from many sources in Jewish texts, that this period, this pandemic, is definitely one of the disruptions that will lead to a far better world. Now, will we be part of that better world or will we resist it? That's up to us. That I cannot tell you who's going to be part of the problem, who's going to be part of the solution. But I have no question that there is a awakening, a global awakening, and it's going to be our choice. And I remember writing a letter, like a public letter, right after the pandemic broke. I wrote that when all this was settled and our children will look back, they're going to see, what did you do? Did you just cower in fear? Were you paralyzed? Or did you see it as an opportunity? Even in your own home and family, how we speak to our children. I know many children are very afraid. They're wow, you got interesting noise. What kind of? That sounds like an alarm for an earthquake. Huh?
Honestly, it's basically what it is. I'm a deep sleeper.
Oh, okay. No problem.
I'm awake.
I thought it was planned because I said global wake-up call. And there you go.
Honestly, that would be awesome.
There we go. So to me, I look at myself and I say this to you. I said it the other day as well. I think we're obligated. Obligated. I don't just mean as a nice gesture. We're obligated. First of all, as Jewish people who've been through a lot, we're obligated to lead the way. And I mean that in a humble way, not an arrogant way. To share with whoever we know, starting with our own families. I tell you, I meet people. I mean, I've spoken to thousands of kids. One of the big questions is my parents are afraid all the time, and it makes me afraid. Especially not in the earlier stages of this, when everything was so tentative and unknown. And I think it's critical, not only not afraid, but we should show our children, say, you know what, we've been here. And we can become greater people and come up with ideas. how you turn a situation. I mean, I know families who come up with great, innovative ideas. And you mentioned connections. That's exactly. I've seen a lot of organizations become very paralyzed because their models are not working. I mean, I'll be very honest. Many synagogues, Chabad houses and others, are in crisis mode because suddenly I've heard this from many rabbis who've asked me. I've been on some insider conversations who say my constituents see us as optional. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, they didn't need us. Shabbos and the Kiddush Club and Friday night, I give my hug. They're not coming. So what do we do? So I said to them, what he told me, you have to reinvent yourself. What does that mean? That means that you need to create now a much more intimate connection with your people. It's not just giving them a kugel or giving them a hug or inviting them to dinner. Now you have to teach, get on the phone, do whatever it takes. If they're ready to meet, if you can meet, great. But you got to be spiritually, to offer them spiritual resources. A rabbi told me I never really did that. I was always the nice guy. I'm there for them when they have a bar mitzvah. I'm there when they have a loss, God forbid. And so I said, no, that's a perfect example. You need to find new ways.
Each rabbi, I'm thinking of a Kabbalah rabbi, has to go out to his constituency with a message, at least every week. And really...
But remember, what happens if a rabbi hasn't been doing it for years? And he became more of a social rabbi.
Yes, it's a very difficult thing.
Okay, exactly. No, but exactly.
I have a nephew who's a Chabad rabbi who I think is really feeling it, the problem, because it's not his mode. He started a thing with lawyers, and he has this tremendous thing, and now he's got to almost go out on Zoom.
Yeah, I understand. Of course, I got it. Here, I do every Sunday night a program called My Life, Chassidus Supplied. So I get questions, anonymous questions. A lot of questions came with rabbis, their wives, rebbitzins, asking, we're not going to have a public seder, and it's really very demoralizing to us. Because that was so... But this is exactly where the paradigm shift comes into play. This can be turned into a tremendous opportunity. Because remember, people are in need. It's not like the people don't care. They just may not be, the way you serve them may be differently. I'm watching how the NFL and baseball are trying to make sure they don't lose their business. Because it's so easy for them, because they're optional industries. Let's be honest. Nobody needs to watch football. But I see that NFL, the Super Bowl, if you noticed, it was like, I found that I was a little repulsed by it, but they were making themselves as they are the moral standard, and they're bringing unity to the world. I don't know if you saw how they packaged themselves. They made themselves as they're the saviors of...
religion.
Yeah. But they have to do that because they need to... Look, what we call is they're desperately trying to be relevant, like that. And
I always said that I went to college in Texas.
Right.
Football is so big in Texas that football is the dafyomi of the ground.
Okay.
It started a meeting, it was football, your team, Clemson, or Houston, or Texas, or whatever the school was, that's the first conversation.
In many cities. For sure. Look, I've always felt that music became the new religion for the young. A rock concert is like a cathedral. A dead concert was like a pilgrimage, with incense and all the other substances necessary to serve God. Right? Yeah. And really, and music itself was like prayers. You see, look at the ecstasy. Look at the sheer what's the word? Just free spiritedness. Yeah, and it's very clear why, because religion was not speaking to these people. Religion became very boring and very technical and conformist and all the negative stuff. And here this is freeing and so on. I see that as a lesson to us. I remember once speaking to a group of rabbis and they said, look how terrible it is. Nobody's coming to synagogue. I said, in America, they say the customer is always right. In Israel, they say the customer is always wrong. But in America, the customer is always right? And since the customer is always right, to start blaming the customers why they're not coming to your store is not a wise business strategy. You have to figure out what they need and get them to come. I told them I see this as a challenge to us, to figure it out. I mean, this has been my whole life, has been always trying to make and present Judaism in a relevant way. Because it's a free world. You can't force people. You can't force your children to go to synagogue. It's maybe when they're babies you can force them, but there is you go to many synagogues and you'll see it's older people. The young don't come, and if it's the young that are coming, it's not. It's whatever. The point is that I see this last year as a true wake up call. I say again, I wish it was without pain and loss. I myself had many losses around me, my community, people, friends, family, and so on. So I'm not talking here insensitively, but overall, I say this without hesitation. I never imagined that there'd be such a powerful wake-up call. I always thought, what will shake up the world? I saw community can be shaken up. Few people can, but global. And to be very honest, it's very disappointing, but also very revealing that we don't have leaders or visionaries. Have you heard from any Christian, Muslim, or Jewish leader like a call? This is the time that you need a Moses who gets up and says, this is a call to action. It's a time to become more loving, more connected, direction, guidance. I don't see it. I see it grassroots, individuals doing that. But this, to me, it really exposed the bankruptcy of our own leadership. And so be it. If that's the reality, there's no, not politically, not nowhere. I'll tell you an interesting thing, if I may share. I don't know if I was going to share, but I'll share it. I do think this way. Because, I don't know, I just think that way. I always look at things like that. What's the opportunity? I guess I'm a spiritual businessman, if you wish. Looking to be proactive. And how do you use this? If yarn wasn't your business, and your business was spirituality, that's what you'd think. How do you use this So I'll tell you what I came up with. I share with you. I mean, nothing confidential, but the reason I don't share it is because it didn't really happen yet, and I feel embarrassed a bit. So I said to myself, you know what? My teachers, the Rabbi and all my mentors and everything I've always learned, that when there's a pandemic and a negative, you have to create a good pandemic. So I actually went online and I registered a website called Pandemic of Goodness and Kindness. And I started making some calls to people I know. It was very hard to get people really inspired, especially in the early stages, because everyone was very much hunkering down and what's going to be, call me, right now I'm not in a mode of thinking forward. I'm just trying to, that type of thing, because all the unknowns. I said, this is the time. And I really felt that would be the opportunity, and it's still there. Maybe some of you have ideas, so let me be practical. So I said to myself, there's the industries, Hollywood, sports, the arts, music, and so on. You have superstars that have tens of millions of followers on Twitter and social media. What are they doing now? Nothing. They're sitting in wherever they are, their dens. So I thought to myself, what happens if we can get them, at least a few of them, and then start getting the ball rolling, to just record a 30-second video, how, as the human race, we are challenged now, but let us rise create a pandemic of goodness and kindness. With 5 suggestions. Today, call someone in need. I mean, people like that would get everyone's attention. It would make them shine. Win-win. No, it doesn't have to have any strings attached. It's not religious. It's not Jewish or Christian. It's not money necessarily related. And I really thought that if you did that right, why would they not do it? And not one of them. You just said it. Not one leader. I have not heard one leader. Not political.
That is something that my suggestion is to get that out to every Chabad rabbi. And so that they can start working.
I called many of them.
Yes.
I don't want to tell you the results.
I know because people don't understand change.
You gotta go for the younger ones.
Not only are they afraid of change, they don't understand change.
Yeah.
For me,
No, there are people that would respond to this. But I was not able to find enough to make it happen.
for my birthday,
I didn't give up. I'm just telling you something that I was literally, back in April, I wrote up a whole document about it. I even wrote up a text. I
you're
did.
right on. You're in the right direction. Pursue it. Keep going.
I will, but if any of you have contacts, what I need, I think, we need to have 3 to 5 big names, and then the others will follow. That's what I think.
have someone I'm going to recommend to you privately.
Okay,
A world leader.
good.
A businessman.
I didn't plan to bring it up, but since we're talking, let's talk tachlis. So, board. It's a boardroom meeting, right? Look, we've got a table. I'm the chairman in this beach chair.
Video. And it's 30 seconds of this one, of this one, of this one. So one of my customers, I have 12 people from that company talking about me. It was, to me, when I saw this, it's 40 minutes or whatever it is, I cried. I was physically crying. It was the most touching, the nicest thing that almost anyone ever did for me. That's how powerful it was for me. Because it was about me. But if we do this about everybody, we give people direction, people are looking for direction. We have to give direction. Because people don't have the imagination to figure it out on their own.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's what I think you're in a position, hopefully through Chabad, to do that for the Jewish people, to lead. And it's so necessary now. And like you said, I think I know a number of different Chabad rabbis that are struggling.
Many are, yeah.
Yes, because everything changed. Their game that they played is not working. So
Look,
they've got to call an audible.
Listen, I come from a background where I'll just share two stories. One, 1940. We all know what was happening in 1940. World War II, Nazis, massacring our brothers and sisters in the millions. So it couldn't have been more demoralizing and more devastating. You know, Jews in America, we all know, didn't do much. It's another story. But I'll tell you this. The previous Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Schneerson, who I mentioned the story with him when they put a gun to his head where he said, "You can't frighten me. You know, this toy can only frighten someone who has one world and many gods, not someone with one God and many worlds." So he came to America literally on one of the last boats from Sweden, via Sweden from Poland, barely got out of Nazi Europe. He came in a wheelchair. There are videos. He was not well. He had MS. He was physically broken, not spiritually, but physically, his body, they had tortured him. You know, it was not good. He was arrested by the mention. It gets off, and I was so taken by this story that it's still like vivid in my mind. I wasn't around for 1940, but they take the Rebbe after a 13-year day ordeal on the boat. You know, it's not easy, especially with... You can imagine how much it was weighing on him also. Family members and the Jewish people were all being killed. It was like, they were all like helpless. He's brought to New York City. It was a hotel called Greystone Hotel. They took him. So everyone thought the Rebbe would want to rest. He's not young, he's not well. No, he wants to say a few words. So in a wheelchair, he's sitting in the front room in his hotel room. Maybe 20 people there. I asked as many that were around. I wanted to hear eyewitness account. And he's talking as if he's like talking to a million people with this courage and with this will, this persistence, and said, "I did not come to America to save my life. If it was up to me, I would have stayed with my brothers and sisters. But God led me here. And He didn't lead me here to live a comfortable life. He led me here to demonstrate that we will not allow Judaism to die, and we'll rebuild, and we'll try to save all the remnants of whatever is being destroyed, and we will have yeshivas and synagogues and thriving Judaism in America." His big line was, "America is not different." Because everyone at that point said America was the golden in Medina. You come here, you drop your tefillin, your Shabbos, everything, but you'll have comforts. Anyway, he was speaking this way. They were pretty surprised at these words. But listen to this. In his diary, he writes that after he finished his speaking, he went into his private room, and a few of the Hasidim and supporters, Americans and others, said they'd like to share a few words with the Rebbe. They came in, and they said, "Rebbe, we love you, we respect you, we honor you, but we don't want you to be disappointed. You know, what you said is very beautiful, very idealistic, but it's not realistic. It's not going to happen. Not in America. And we want the Rebbe to lower his expectations, to preserve your honor, the honor of your Holy Father, your grandfather, your holy great-grandfather, your holy..." Like they were. So he writes, these were my friends speaking to me. And he said these words. He says, after they left the room, he says, you can't imagine the tears I shed the first night on American soil, hearing this from my friends. Now, obviously, the Rebbe did not listen to them. And his spirit was not impossible to destroy. It was 1940. And what he did was, he continued. 10 years later, his son-in-law, which is the Rebbe, our Rebbe, took over. And also 1950 was 5 years after the war. There was still the refugees and the immigrants and no language. Yeah, it was the harshest time in Jewish history. Israel became a state and was also struggling. But they had something in them that just refused to surrender to the status quo and to all the naysayers. And this always tremendously affected me deeply, because I saw these are leaders. They don't go. They're not going to make a vote. Who's with me? You do what you got to do. And you're the commander in chief, and there's a war to be fought. It's a spiritual war. So, and that was much harsher times than now. So that's where I come from. The problem is you don't have many, and I really say this with complete humility. I was honored to sit at the feet of this type of people. I was honored to be in their presence. I was honored to learn from them. I don't know what I'd be like without that. Who knows? But that's what drives me. And I want to try to ignite it in you too. You have to feel that way. To me, there's no other option. This is the time. I remember feeling this is what you're trained for your whole life. At times like this, when there's a disrupt, what are you going to do? When things are going well, everybody's happy-go-lucky. The boats, on the ocean, everything is calm. The sun is shining. But when there's a storm, what are you going to do? And I really feel so. Therefore, my final answer to the question, new norm, completely up to us. There's plenty of change happening. There's been a big global wake-up call. There's no excuse anymore. I remember speaking to some people months ago, and the guy, I called someone, how are you doing? She says to me, listen, I used to always give you the excuse, call me after the summer, call me after the winter, call me after this break, that break. I don't have anything to say now. I have no restaurants to go to. So I said, okay, so it's time to start studying. Maybe it's time to learn a little Torah. Maybe let's learn together. Let's talk. And I really believe that's the call of the hour. And it's not over yet. Look, the uncertainty is still hanging.
That was the beginning of what are we to do next.
Yeah.
Now is the time to establish.
So to me, I told Bruce when he said, you want to come for Pesach? So I said to him, listen, you're going to have 400 or 500 people. If you don't mind, I'm going to say some things that are going to shake people up. He says, that's what I want you for. So I'm doing it. Now, I'm not apologizing, because those that are not able to be shaken up, it won't make a difference what I say. So I'm fine.
Most people, it's right over their heads.
It's because people are very used to their own. They want to just keep their boat floating. Okay, well, I feel also in a certain way, like to me it would be like a disgrace if we don't do what our parents and grandparents would have done. I feel like it's like we owe it to the generations before us, and coming after us. This is a time, I'm telling you, how we will behave will shape our children forever. Because whenever crisis they ever face, God forbid, or any challenge, they will see, what did we do when we were challenged? I say this all the time to parents, educators. They will see that it's not what you say to them, it's how you behaved. And if they saw that you got paralyzed and you retreated, they're going to retreat. What do you think they're going to do? That's what children do. They do what their adults did. Do you agree?
Yeah.
So you're the next generation. You're the future. You have to carry. We're the veterans. Huh?
Is that why we're sitting on
And it
opposite
goes
sides
fast,
of
because
the
I just
table?
heard those words like yesterday.
I'm sorry?
Is that why we're sitting on opposite sides of the table?
No, that was just plumb luck.
Well, those are my thoughts for today, my friends.
Thank you.
Interesting.
And so I have my chapter, Torah Meaning for Life. There's I write a chapter on unity, So I begin the chapter by saying, where does heaven meet earth? And I conclude the chapter by saying, right at your doorstep. You have the power to bring heaven and earth together. Don't think it's out there. Someone else is going to do it. I'll just conclude with this story. I like this story. It's a Pesach story, huh? Yeah, it's a Pesach story. It's a very beautiful story. So there was a Baal Shem Tov student who was always working. He wanted to have the Gilui Eliyahu, they call it, the revelation of Elijah. It's considered like divine revelation. So he asked the Baal Shem Tov, where could he find this revelation of Eliyahu Hanavi? Eliyahu Hanavi is always like the savior. So the Baal Shem Tov said to him, listen, Pesach is coming, and Eliyahu Hanavi comes to the Seder. So I suggest you travel to this in this town and stay and find a place to stay, and you will find Eliyahu. Anyway, he comes to this town, and the people say, where could he stay? It's already late before Pesach. So there's a house people point him to. Okay, before he enters the house, he hears inside the house a racket. There's a bunch of children, and the wife is yelling to her husband, we don't have any money for matzah, we're missing this and we're missing that. Okay, so he knocks on the door, and he says, do you have a place to stay? I'm happy to pay. They say, this is a house, we don't have much here. He says, don't worry, I will take care of everything. So he goes out, the last hours before Pesach, buys wine, matzah, whatever they need. And they have a beautiful Seder. He helps them buy some clothing. Last minute, okay. Anyway, beautiful Seder, nice family. A little challenge, but so be it. Pesach, the first night, the first day's end, and it comes back to the Baal Shem Tov, and he says, I stayed somewhere, but I didn't have any Eliyahu, Gili Eliyahu. So the Baal Shem Tov says, go back for the last days. He goes back, and again he hears behind the door that I don't have money for anything. So, and then suddenly he hears the woman say to the husband, maybe Eliyahu Hanavi will appear again, the last days of Pesach, and help. So they saw him, so he realized Eliyahu Hanavi is you. Stop looking for someone else to save you. Maybe that's you. And he came in and he was Eliyahu Hanavi again. I always find that's a very empowering story. People are looking, someone else is going to do the job. No, you're the guy. They're waiting for you. No.
There's that book, There Is No Messiah, and You're It.
Yeah, very good. So, okay, so Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
Scott.